Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing on the edge of the ocean. The wind is howling. The water is black and freezing. There is nothing ahead of you, no map, no GPS, no promise that land even exists out there. And yet you climb into a wooden boat with your family, your animals, and everything you own, and you sail. That is exactly what the Vikings did. Around the year 982 AD, a man named Erik the Red was kicked out of Iceland. He had killed a man in a fight, actually, more than one man, and the people of Iceland decided they had had enough of him. He was exiled, cast out, told to leave and not come back for 3 years. Now, most people in that situation would sit somewhere quietly and wait. But not Erik. He was not that kind of man. Instead of waiting, Erik sailed west into the unknown. He had heard rumors, just whispers, really, that there was land somewhere out there beyond the ice. So he went looking. And after weeks of sailing through freezing, dangerous waters, he found it, a massive island, mostly covered in ice and rock, yes, but along the edges, along the coasts, there were green valleys, rivers, and land that could actually support life. Erik spent 3 years exploring this island. He mapped the coastlines, he studied the land, and when his exile was over and he returned to Iceland, he had a plan. He wanted people to come back with him. He wanted to build a colony, so he did something quite clever. He called the place Greenland. Think about that. An island covered mostly in ice and snow, and he called it Greenland. Some historians say it was a marketing trick, a way to make the place sound warm and welcoming. Others say there really were green pastures along the coast. Either way, it worked. People were curious. Iceland was getting crowded. Farmland was running out. And here was this man, full of confidence, saying there was a new land waiting for them. In 985 AD, Erik the Red set sail again. This time, he was not alone. Around 25 ships followed him, loaded with hundreds of settlers, along with cattle, sheep, goats, horses, and dogs. It was one of the boldest migrations in human history. Families leaving behind everything they knew, chasing a dream of something better. But the sea does not care about dreams. It is cold and it is dangerous. Storms came, waves crashed over the ships, some vessels turned back, others were lost forever. By the time the fleet reached Greenland, only 14 of the 25 ships had made it. Around half of the people who started that journey never arrived. But the ones who did arrive, they looked at this icy, wild land and they decided to make it home. Now here's where the story gets truly remarkable. Because surviving in Greenland was not just difficult. It was an everyday battle against nature itself. Greenland is enormous. About 80% of it is covered by a thick sheet of ice. The temperatures in winter drop far below freezing. There are almost no trees. You cannot grow wheat or barley there. And the winters are long, brutally, painfully long. So how did these people survive? How did thousands of men, women, and children make a life in one of the most extreme environments on Earth? The answer is simple. They were smart, they were tough, and they worked together. First, the Vikings chose their land carefully. They did not try to live just anywhere. They settled along the southwestern coastline, where the fjords, those long, narrow inlets of sea cutting into the land, offered some protection from the worst winds. In these sheltered valleys, the land was greener, the soil was softer, and animals could graze. Erik the Red himself built his farm at a place called Brattahlid. It was a prime location, tucked inside a fjord, protected from coastal storms, with good pasture nearby. Other families built their farms nearby, and slowly communities began to form. These were not just little campsites. These were real settlements, with hundreds of farms, churches, community halls, and even a bishop later on. The backbone of Viking life in Greenland was the farm. Each farm kept sheep, goats, and cattle. The animals provided milk, cheese, butter, and wool, all essential for survival. But here is the thing. You could not just let the animals eat grass all year, because for much of the year, there was no grass. Winters were long, and the snow covered everything. So the farmers had to cut and store enormous amounts of hay during the short summer, just to feed their animals through the dark months ahead. It was exhausting work. Every single summer had to count, but farming alone was never going to be enough. Greenland was not a land of plenty, it was a land of survival. So the Vikings hunted. They hunted seals on the ice, which gave them meat and fat for oil. They hunted caribou in the valleys. They caught fish in the rivers and the sea. And for some of their most important goods, they made long, dangerous journeys far up the northern coast to a place called Disco Bay. In Disco Bay, there were walruses, massive, slow-moving creatures that gathered on the beaches, and their tusks, their long ivory tusks, were worth a fortune in Europe. Imagine sailing in an open wooden boat for 15 days through freezing Arctic waters to hunt walruses. No roof over your head, salt water spraying your face, the constant threat of storms, ice, and drowning. And yet the Viking men did this regularly, because walrus ivory was their golden ticket. It was the thing they could trade with Europe, in exchange for iron, timber, and other goods they could not produce themselves. This trade was absolutely critical. The Vikings of Greenland were never fully self-sufficient. They needed Europe, and as long as Europe needed their ivory, they were okay. Back in the settlements, society was organized and surprisingly sophisticated. There were wealthy landowners with large farms, and poorer families who worked as tenants. There was a church, actually many churches. Christianity had come to Greenland around the year 1000 AD, brought by Erik the Red's own son, Leif Erikson, the same man who later sailed to North America. There were laws, councils, and community decisions. This was not a group of desperate, scattered survivors. This was a civilization, small, yes, but real, at its peak. The Viking settlements in Greenland may have had anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000 people living across hundreds of farms. For hundreds of years, they held on, they adapted. They were resilient in ways that are hard to fully appreciate today, sitting in our warm homes with food in our refrigerators. But the world was changing around them, and not in their favor. Around the 1200s, something began to shift. The climate started getting colder. This period, known today as the Little Ice Age, slowly crept across the North Atlantic. Summers got shorter, pastures shrank. It became harder to grow enough hay to keep the animals alive through winter. Small farmers struggled first. Then even the larger farms began to feel the pressure. The Vikings adapted, as they always had. They focused more on hardier animals like sheep and goats, which could survive on less food. They hunted more seals. They worked harder. They held together, but then the trade started to break down. In 1346, the Black Death, the most devastating plague in human history, swept across Europe. It killed tens of millions of people. Norway, which was Greenland's main trading partner, was hit hard. Ships that used to come to Greenland with supplies and take back ivory and furs stopped coming, first less often, then rarely, then not at all. And there was another blow. Elephant ivory from Africa and India began arriving in European markets. Suddenly, walrus ivory was no longer as valuable. The one thing that made Greenland worth trading with. Gone, almost overnight. At the same time, a new people had been moving into Greenland from the north, the Inuit, skilled Arctic hunters who had mastered life in the extreme cold, in ways even the Vikings had not. They had better techniques for hunting on the ice, better clothing, better boats for the Arctic waters. Historians debate exactly what happened between the Vikings and the Inuit, whether there was conflict, trade, or mostly just distant coexistence. But the Inuit thrived, and the Vikings faded. By the early 1400s, the Western settlement was silent. Then the Eastern settlement too. The last written record of the Norse in Greenland is from 1408. A simple note about a wedding in a church. After that, nothing. Nobody knows exactly how it ended. There was no dramatic battle, no single catastrophe. It seems the population just slowly dwindled, people leaving, dying, and not being replaced. Until one day, the farms were empty, the churches were quiet, the fires had gone cold. When European explorers came back to Greenland in the 1700s, they found no descendants of the Norse settlers. Only the Inuit remained, living and thriving in the same land that had ultimately defeated the Vikings. But here is the thing, and this is important: the Vikings did not fail. Not really. They survived in Greenland for nearly 500 years, 5 centuries. Think about that. Ordinary men, women, and children living at the very edge of the world in one of the harshest climates ever faced by human beings. They built farms and churches and communities out of almost nothing. They raised families, they told stories, they prayed and hunted and laughed and struggled and kept going, generation after generation after generation. They were not defeated by weakness. They were defeated by a world that changed too fast, in too many ways, all at once. And perhaps that is the most human story of all. We build, we endure, we adapt, and sometimes in the end the world moves on, but the story never truly disappears. The Vikings of Greenland are proof that the human spirit can survive almost anything. And even in silence, their legacy still echoes. In the ruins of their farms, in the bones beneath the frozen ground, and in the remarkable story of what it truly means to call a wild, impossible land home.